My name is Anders, and I've always thought of myself as someone who builds everything in my life on hard work and loyalty. I never saw myself as naive, never believed I would be betrayed. My company has grown from humble beginnings into a stable business with steady revenues and a good reputation. I've put in countless hours developing products, making contacts, and nurturing relationships. Things have gone so smoothly that sometimes I've paused to wonder if it was too good to be true. I'm married to Sophia, a woman I love. We've been married for several years, and I thought our marriage was built on trust and respect. I also have a best friend, Daniel, who has been with me since my first tentative steps in the business world. He was the one who gave me insights, advice, and sometimes warned me about pitfalls. For a long time, I felt blessed to have these people close to me. My daily life revolved around the company, but not in a destructive way. I enjoyed waking up in the morning, skimming through the day's numbers and planning strategies for new deals. If I ever came across a new business setup, Daniel would be the first person I'd call to bounce ideas off of. Sophia was often in the background offering her support. She'd ask smart questions about our revenue streams, how our employees were doing, and whether I ever planned on taking some time off to rest. I could see in her eyes that she was proud of me, and I felt grateful to have such an understanding partner. Daniel and I saw each other often, sometimes for lunch meetings, and sometimes for dinner with our respective partners. He was one of the few people I let in on my most confidential plans. When I thought about the future, I envisioned that Daniel and I would continue to collaborate as before, with Sophia always by my side. I had no reason to doubt their loyalty. I'm a pretty straightforward person, and I tend to ask directly if something feels off, but there had never been any signs of dissatisfaction or betrayal. On the contrary, everyone seemed happy, and the company was flourishing. However, everything changed gradually, without me noticing at first. It started when I noticed a slight change in how Sophia spoke about Daniel. She mentioned his name more often than usual, not in a way that seemed suspicious back then, more like she was impressed by his new projects. She showed interest in Daniel's plans, laughed at his jokes, referred to things he'd said. I figured maybe she just thought he was fun to talk to. Sophia has always been social and curious, but one evening when we were all out to dinner, I caught a meaningful glance between Daniel and Sophia. I couldn't quite put my finger on what exactly was strange, but there was something in the way their eyes met and how she then turned away, making me pause for a second. They smiled at each other as if they were sharing a secret. It could, of course, have been something innocent, but I still felt a bit of a sting inside. I dismissed it almost immediately. No one wants to believe anything shady is going on between one's wife and one's best friend. No. Later that evening when we went home, I couldn't let go of that meaningful look. I tried asking Sophia how she thought the dinner went, and she just said it was nice. When I asked what she and Daniel had been laughing about, she brushed it off, saying it was some old inside joke. I didn't think more of it at the time. Days went by, and I started noticing how she spoke less with me but mentioned Daniel more often in conversations about all sorts of things. She complimented him, praised him for his amazing business sense, and seemed up to date on details about his life that I didn't even know. When I asked how she found out about these things, she said they had been texting a bit. I felt a little overlooked, but at the same time I was quite busy myself, so I dismissed my worries. Despite this, I couldn't shake an uneasy feeling. I'm not a jealous person by nature, but something was making me suspicious. I'm quite meticulous, so if I start suspecting something, I like to look into it factually. At the same time, I'm very concerned about privacy. I didn't want to be that kind of husband who snoops through his wife's phone or interrogates her about friendships. But then more signs appeared. One evening, Sophia was typing messages and put her phone down when I entered the room. I joked asking if she was sending secrets to Daniel, and she laughed a bit too loudly before changing the subject. I understood it looked suspicious, but I didn't know what to do with my suspicion. A few days later, Sophia, completely out of the blue, mentioned that she was going to a spa on Friday and that she really needed to relax. I thought it sounded good, and I had some work to do anyway. But right before the weekend, a mutual acquaintance called to see if Sophia and I wanted to join her for lunch. She mentioned she had seen Sophia enter a building nowhere near the spa she claimed she was going to. I was confused, but tried to stay calm. When Sophia came home later and smelled like her usual perfume, Without seeming particularly relaxed, I asked how the spa had been. She said it was good, but didn't seem very enthusiastic. I let it be for the moment, but I decided to look into it further. I'm used to doing research, so I checked the booking system of the spa she said she would visit. It might not have been entirely moral, but I used my contacts to find out if she had really been there. No booking in her name, no spa treatment at all in the time slot she claimed. I really started to wonder what was going on. Why was she lying? And how did Daniel fit into all this? As a last resort, I got into her phone when she happened to leave it unlocked for a short moment. I felt horrible for doing it, but I had to know. Sure enough, I saw a message from Daniel. Same place on Friday? I think we can talk undisturbed there. My heart sank. They had been meeting up. She had lied about the spa, and she had met Daniel instead. I still didn't know if it was a full-blown love affair, but my gut feeling was on edge. I didn't want to confront them directly. I decided to keep my eyes open. Around the same time, strange things started happening at the company. Important deals I thought were secured suddenly disappeared. One of my salespeople mentioned that a new competitor was entering the market and undercutting our prices in the same product segment. That in itself isn't unusual, but the way it was happening seemed off. It was as if they had direct insight into our contracts and which business contacts we were working with. I couldn't understand how a competitor could so quickly gain access to precisely the customers we were targeting. At first, I thought we had a leak in the company, but I didn't know who it could be. The last person I suspected was Daniel. He was my friend and advisor. Why would he sabotage me? I tried to be systematic and go through the accounting in detail. I discovered strange transactions that couldn't be explained. Amounts were moved between accounts, disappeared, and then reappeared. I asked our financial manager about it, but she seemed confused and claimed it must be some administrative error or a booking adjustment that hadn't gone through properly. I had a feeling it wasn't that simple. During a late-night session in my office, I went through old contracts and email exchanges. I suddenly saw that some emails containing important client agreements had been forwarded to an external address. When I tried to trace the address, I couldn't find an official recipient, suggesting it was an anonymous address. I was torn. On the one hand, I had a nagging suspicion that my wife and my best friend were involved in something. On the other hand, I couldn't imagine them planning both a personal betrayal and a business coup against me. So I started looking more closely into Daniel's activities. He had said he was working on a new project, but he was very secretive about the details. Previously, he had always shared information about his projects and how he thought, but recently he gave evasive answers. I knew he was a skilled strategist and had the competence to start a competing company. But he was my friend, my closest ally. I could hardly believe he could go behind my back like that. When I asked him outright how his new business ventures were going, he only said that he had some prospects in the pipeline and that he'd tell me more when things became more concrete. I noticed how he changed the subject right afterward. My suspicion grew, but I played along and tried not to show that I sensed anything. The unsettling feeling of being watched in my own company drove me to take additional precautions. I asked one of my most trusted accountants to go through our contracts in detail. I didn't say anything about what I suspected, but simply asked her to be extremely thorough. She came back after a few days and said there were some ambiguities in certain contracts. They were either invalid or missing, and she had trouble clarifying which amounts had actually come in. She also found some documentation regarding a client we had recently lost to a competitor. But not only that, the same client had contacted us again, wondering why we had pulled out. I realized that someone was actively sabotaging us. At the same time, my personal life problem was escalating. I decided to act when I saw Sophia leave on a Friday again with the same spa excuse. This time I took the day off and chose to follow her. When she drove off, I took my car and stayed in the background. I felt like a spy in a movie. It was unsettling, but I had to get clarity. To my horror, I saw her pull up at a hotel. I parked a bit away and waited. She got out of the car, looked around, and went inside. I waited a few minutes, then slipped into the same hotel. After a while in the lobby, I saw her in a distant corner with Daniel. At first, they were talking calmly, then they kissed. I felt an icy wind blow through my chest. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I stood there, hidden behind a corner, watching my wife and my best friend in an intimate embrace. I felt my insides boil with rage and sorrow. I waited until they went to a hotel suite. All I wanted was to grab them and scream at them for how they could do this to me. But I was also paralyzed. I felt I couldn't storm in right then because I needed a strategy. I took photos from a distance as proof. Then I went out, got into my car, and tried to collect myself. It was a crushing moment. My worst fears had been confirmed, but I also realized there might be an even bigger plan behind it. My mind raced. Why would Daniel and Sophia risk everything? Was there money involved? Was it about taking over my company? That was the only logical explanation I could come up with. I knew I needed to find concrete evidence, not just for the infidelity, but also for potential fraud. When Sophia came home that evening, I pretended to be busy with work. I watched her surreptitiously. I saw her look at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. It seemed like she was carrying guilt, but she tried to act as if everything was normal. I didn't have the strength to confront her directly. The next day, I called Daniel and suggested lunch. I wanted to look him in the eye and see how far he was willing to go in his little game. He sounded stressed and said he couldn't. Instead, we agreed on a quick coffee. When we met, he repeated that he was extremely busy, trying to make it sound like he just had a lot of new projects. I noticed how he seemed uneasy, that I was asking too many questions. He constantly changed the subject and talked a lot about how well things were going for me and my company. I just nodded and smiled while I was boiling inside. When the coffee was over, I realized he was doing everything he could to hide something. I confronted Sophia a few days later. I told her that I had seen her and Daniel at the hotel. At first, she tried to deny it, but when I told her I had photographic evidence, she fell silent. She admitted the affair. I was almost relieved not to hear any more lies, but at the same time, it felt like the ground beneath me was collapsing. I yelled at her and asked how she could do this to me after everything we had built together. She tried to apologize, but it felt hollow. When I asked if it was just a love affair, or if it was about something else, she looked away. She said I had never had time for her, that Daniel was there and listened to her. I understood it was her attempt to shift the blame onto me, but I got no clear answer about the company. I asked her directly if she had helped Daniel sabotage my business, but she dismissed it, saying she knew nothing about that. I could see she was lying. She was good at manipulating conversations, but I knew her so well that I could see the signs. I realized she didn't want to admit the extent of her involvement. I knew I needed a clear picture of how big the sabotage was. It was no longer just about my marriage, it was about my life's work. Over the following weeks, I delved deeper and deeper into the company's documentation, looking for contracts, emails, transactions, anything that could indicate a conspiracy. I discovered that Daniel had quietly registered a new company. Through a contact at the Swedish company's registration office, I found out that Daniel was listed as the sole owner, and that it had been done recently. It seemed he had acquired customers he had been in contact with through my company, transferring them to his own new business by offering more favorable terms or providing false information that my company was heading for bankruptcy. I felt a stabbing pain in my chest as I read these documents, as they confirmed that not only had my best friend slept with my wife, but he was also trying to destroy my business. My next step was to approach a colleague I trusted. She was my accountant and someone I had known for many years. I showed her all the documents and asked her to help me build a legal plan to confront Daniel and possibly charge him with fraud. She was as outraged as I was when she saw the scope of his manipulations. Together, we started gathering all the evidence: email correspondence, bank transactions, and hidden contracts. I also needed a technical expert, someone who could secure digital evidence before Daniel or Sophia could delete anything. Through a contact in the IT industry, I got hold of a guy named Marcus. I hired him to mirror servers, email accounts, and hard drives. He found links between Daniel's IP addresses and email accounts Sophia had used. It was clear that Sophia had been helping Daniel by sending confidential company information that gave their new business an edge. I felt sick when I realized how systematically they had acted. At the same time, I began to think about when and how I should strike. I wanted revenge, but I knew my desire for vengeance couldn't overshadow my strategy. Publicly exposing both of them could be risky if I didn't have solid proof. Also, Daniel and Sophia could try to turn the situation against me, so I chose to lie low, gather evidence, and even act as if I suspected nothing. I continued going to work, behaving like a company leader, and maintaining a normal facade. When Daniel contacted me about his new ideas, I pretended to be interested. When Sophia tried to avoid me, I told her I understood she needed some time to herself. Inside, I was burning, but I kept it together. Those nights were the worst. I slept poorly, tormented by thoughts of how I could have been so blind. I was dealing with anger and grief. It felt like I no longer had any real security in life. The two people I trusted the most in the world had betrayed me. Even though my rational mind wanted to focus on saving the company, I couldn't escape the personal shame and humiliation. Keeping up appearances was tough, but I consoled myself with the thought that I would get justice when everything came to light. Gradually, I began to plan a public reveal that would take place at a major company meeting. I knew we had an important board meeting scheduled where I would normally go over the year's results and present plans for the following year. With help from my accountant, who anonymously contributed economic reports about Daniel's and Sophia's activities, I planned to drop a bombshell at just the right moment, letting Daniel and Sophia believe it was just a regular meeting. I might even let them give a short presentation. And when they least expected it, I would present the evidence. Before the meeting, I prepared thoroughly. Marcus, the IT expert, and I compiled printed emails. We had bank statements showing how Daniel systematically transferred funds to his new company. We also had screenshots of conversations that I hadn't even wanted to read in detail. It was enough to know they existed. The day before the meeting, Daniel called and asked about our financial situation. He sounded nervous. I played dumb and said everything was under control. That same evening, Sophia tried to talk to me, but I said I had to prepare my presentation. I could see on her face that she suspected something was up, but I didn't know how much she understood. On the morning of the meeting, I was so full of adrenaline that I could barely eat breakfast. I went into the boardroom and greeted everyone. There were about 10 of us there, including a few minority shareholders, our financial manager, a couple of bank representatives, and Daniel and Sophia. I opened the meeting in the usual way, went through the annual results, and talked about future projects. Daniel kept his head down and Sophia looked grim. I noticed Daniel didn't even try his usual routine of suggesting improvements. When I reached the end of my presentation, I said I had a surprise to share. Something I felt everyone should know before we moved on, and the room went silent, and everyone turned their attention to me. I took out a folder and placed some papers on the table. Without initially naming any names, I explained that someone within the company had transferred funds to an external party and sent critical business documents to an unknown email address. I saw Daniel clench his jaw. I continued by saying I had asked an external accounting firm to investigate these transactions and the correspondence. I then began reading a series of emails that clearly showed Daniel and Sophia colluding to take over clients through a new company. I also explained that certain major clients had been told my company was about to go bankrupt, so they would move to this new player. Fortunately, some of these clients had contacted me to verify the rumors, which had aroused my suspicion. Daniel interrupted me and tried to deny everything, but I continued with even more concrete evidence: bank statements, corporate registration documents for his new company, and forwarded emails from my server. Sophia tried to stand up and interrupt me, but I calmly asked her to sit down and wait her turn. I could see her face flush as she realized her role in all this was exposed. Then I dropped the news of their private relationship. I didn't go into any juicy details, but I made it clear that their affair had formed the basis of the betrayal and that it had been going on for months. Several people in the room gasped. Daniel tried to drown me out with excuses about misunderstandings, but he obviously lacked a convincing explanation. I ended my presentation by saying I had reported attempted fraud to the police and had taken legal measures to freeze Daniel's new company's accounts as far as possible. I had also prepared a separate lawsuit against Sophia for her involvement in leaking company secrets. The board sat in silence. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the room. Daniel looked around desperately. Sophia looked like she wanted to sink into the floor. I felt a strange mixture of relief and sorrow. That I had to come here, in front of witnesses, to reveal my wife's and best friend's betrayal was something I never thought I would have to do. But I realized I had no other choice. I needed to protect my company and defend my honor. The meeting ended with me, along with my accountant and lawyer, going through the legal steps. Daniel and Sophia left the room with their tails between their legs. I suspected Daniel realized his reputation in business circles would now be destroyed. He had been my friend for many years, but he was also well known in the industry. Once word of his fraud spread, he wouldn't be able to do serious business again. As for Sophia, I was more conflicted. I had once loved her, but after everything that had happened, it felt like a stranger had taken her place. I remember how she once supported me, how we shared ambitions. Now, it felt as if all our memories were tainted. A few days after the meeting, I met with the police to go through the details. I didn't expect it would be easy to get Daniel prosecuted, but at least I had built a solid case. At the same time, I knew this was going to take time and money. I had already spoken with my bank and some of my key partners to explain the situation and ask for their continued trust. Most were shocked but also understanding. My company wasn't indebted in a way that threatened our operations. We had lost a few clients, but some were ready to return once they heard the real story. Daniel tried to call me a few times after that, but I didn't answer. Sophia packed her things and moved out, more or less by mutual agreement. We didn't say much to each other at that point. She tried to give me her version of how she had felt neglected, but I couldn't bear to listen. I was too hurt and angry. It felt like it no longer mattered. I was determined to move on without her or Daniel. I slept badly, ate poorly, but I was comforted by the fact that I had saved my company and that the truth had come out. Over the following months, I focused on rebuilding the business. I restructured certain parts, introduced new security measures to avoid internal leaks. I spoke openly to my employees about why certain things had shaken us up. Those who knew me personally expressed sympathy and support. I noticed that loyalty to the company was actually strengthened by the crisis, because many employees were outraged on my behalf. Some had suspected there was something fishy going on, but hadn't dared to say anything. Gradually, I began to see the light at the end of the tunnel. The legal processes were ongoing. My lawyers believed Daniel would be forced to pay damages for fraud or at least for misappropriation of trade secrets. The important thing for me was that he wouldn't walk away unscathed. I heard rumors that he was out there trying to salvage his own reputation, but nobody wanted to be associated with his name anymore. A mutual acquaintance had seen him at some event, but he'd apparently left as soon as people started whispering about what he had done. Sophia mostly kept to herself. She occasionally reached out to ask about practical matters regarding the divorce. We didn't really share many assets apart from the house, and I was prepared to let her have a lot of it just to be rid of her. There was nothing I wanted to share with her anymore. Neither memories nor material items. Even though I lost both my wife and my best friend, sometimes I felt strangely free. I no longer had to make an effort to maintain a facade. I started seeing a therapist to work through my anger and grief, and I realized I had found an inner strength through all this. I also realized I couldn't carry all the blame on my shoulders. I wasn't the one who forced them to betray me. I wasn't perfect, but no one deserves that kind of treachery. Over the next year, I focused intensely on developing the company. I hired a new marketing director, invested in some product areas I had previously neglected, and entered into new collaborations. By the end of the year, our numbers were on the rise again. I felt proud that I hadn't let myself be completely crushed. I had lost a lot on a personal level, but I'd gained a new understanding of how fragile life can be. I had also become more vigilant and careful about who I let into my inner circle. The divorce from Sophia was finalized relatively smoothly, at least legally. Emotionally, it was another matter. There was one day in court when I had to see her again. She looked at me as if she wanted to say something, but nothing came out. I noticed how she sought sympathy from me. Maybe she regretted it, maybe not. I honestly didn't care. The judge went through the paperwork, and then it was done. We went our separate ways without further conversation. It felt as if a chapter in my life was closing. Not just closing, it was being thrown away, because it had turned out to be a lie.
If you liked this story, please subscribe and give us a thumbs up. It helps a lot, and you won't miss out on any future stories. Take care and live your best life.